Welcome, Peculiars. It's the Peculiar Book Club special VIP episode. No, Brandy is not here with us right now. She is off on a European adventure, but that's okay because Brandy is not the host of this episode. This is a special VIP episode. This is one of our special authors hosting authors. So let me introduce to you the true host of today's episode. It is Bill Schutt.
Great here. Hi.
Welcome. All right, it's your show. I'm here to help out, but please, absolutely take us away on this journey.
Okay. Well, tonight I'm going to be introducing, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, by the way, Dr. Surekha Davis. And she is a British author, speaker, and historian of science, art, and ideas. Her first book, Renaissance Ethnography and the Invention of the Human, won the Maurice D. Fourcroy Prize for the best first book in intellectual history from the Journal of History of Ideas, and the Roland H. Bainton Prize in History and Theology. She's published essays and book reviews about the histories of biology, anthropology, and monsters in the Times Literary Supplement, Nature, Science, and Eon. She's also the author of an intriguing new book, Humans, A Monstrous History. Welcome to the Peculiar Book Club, Surekha Davis.
Hello, Peculiars.
Welcome to this side of the screen.
Wow, it's weird and cool being on this side of the screen, having been an audience member for so long.
Tell your audience where you usually watch this from.
Well, I'm usually in the Low Countries, so it's 1 a.m. And yeah, I'm on Paris time today. And I can see the chat in a different kind of window. And I can also see that my copy editor is here, Susan Silver. Hello, Susan. Susan knows where all the bodies are buried.
Susan says, hello, everyone.
It's so good.
All right.
Well, I thought I'd start off with a couple of questions, and we'll see how it goes from there. And of course, we'll be bringing in questions from the Peculiars later, as well as some other really cool things that you Peculiars know all about as far as what takes place during this show. Okay, so Surekha, can you explain how ancient thinkers like Hippocrates, Pliny the Elder, and Galen set the stage for 15th and 16th century European flag planters like Columbus, who saw the indigenous people they encountered as less than human, even monstrous?
Well, I guess the story begins with ancient geography and bodies. And for, ancient thinkers in medicine and in geography and ethnography, the human body was squishy, was malleable, and, people were supposedly capable of changing depending on what the climate around them was doing. And, people's bodies supposedly had 4 essential humors, substances that would change their balance depending on how hot the place was you lived, how cold, and so on. And tied onto this idea was this sense that in places that had really harsh climates, bodies and minds would become monstrous, so they couldn't stay in a kind of regular shape. But that does then beg the question, if bodies are nice and quote unquote normal in the Mediterranean, where those ancient Greek and Roman thinkers were, and bodies were monstrous far away, and indeed there were supposedly these monstrous species with their faces in their chests, or perhaps too many pairs of limbs. If space is normal in the Mediterranean and there are monstrous peoples far away, well, where's the boundary between human space and monster space? So once you're actually circumnavigating the whole Earth, you've got to ask that question. And so the stories that explorers told about peoples they encountered, explorers from Europe in the Americas, for example, often have these accounts of peoples who potentially are fundamentally different because of the geography of where they are.
Yeah, I having written a book about cannibalism, the reason that I brought up Columbus was because when he got to the New World, um, he was looking for gold and didn't find it. And initially he seemed to have gotten along pretty well with the indigenous people in the Caribbean. But once not a lot of gold got picked up, he thought that the next best thing would be humans and enslaving these people. And once he got the okay from Queen Isabella, then really all bets were off. And so I just when I read your book, I really thought about how that concept of the other, these people came to the New World thinking that they were going to find monsters, and that didn't just happen in the 15th and 16th century, as you know. It happened for centuries after that, and so I found that to be a really intriguing, and especially since we sort of do the same thing nowadays, as your book really pointed out just so well. Related to that, I've always been intrigued by the belief that what people eat shapes who they are. Can you explain how diet contributed to monster making?
Well, that was another kind of strand of the bodies being squishy thing. Um, and one of the ways in which you could, kind of try and maintain your health was by eating, hot or cold foods that would balance your humors. Now, the problem with exploration again was that you these kind of colonists, explorers, missionaries, they would find themselves in places where the foodstuffs were different. And if you were, for example, a Christian and wanting to celebrate Mass with the kind of bread, wheat bread, and wine, what do you do in a place where there isn't wheat and there aren't grapes? Is it still communion if you make that wafer with something else and the wine is not from grapes? Is that still the blood and the body of Christ? So the way in which food and faith and bodies were kind of tangled up together, also was a way in which monsters were part of the story of humanity. What you ate, if you stopped eating the right things, that might also be one of the things that made you wrong, as spiritually as well as kind of physiologically. The Europeans at times feared tobacco, they feared chocolate. Chocolate especially was one of those substances that was used in rituals in Mesoamerica. And so, one of the fears when the missionaries or colonial administrators saw people of Spanish descent consuming this stuff, or people of mixed heritage consuming chocolate, was that they weren't actually going to be able to stay a regularly religious person, or a person who was kind of physiologically capable of understanding Christianity and going to heaven.
I found it really interesting that your comment in the book that all of these things about chocolate and how suspicious people were of it, but once it got into Europe, then the rich people loved it, and it was sort of became a big thing for them.
Well, suddenly there were kind of new stories being told about it, for sure. And I can't help thinking of one of those many terrible statements from last summer about how Haitians were supposedly eating people's pets. One of the ways in which that comment took off online was people were shouting about how these people were eating animals. Like, when did the average American become vegetarian? And so the kind of language around food has kind of often been one of those ways in which people talk about how people are different through different,
Frogs, for example, calling the French frogs because of
calling the French frogs, calling, the kind of French calling the British les roast beef for eating roast beef. And, it's as if, culturally kind of so many kind of stereotypes are tied up with defining difference and threatening difference through the foods people ate. And if you go back to a place like medieval Spain, where there were people who were Jewish and Muslim and Christian, and then the monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella forced Christian Muslims to convert or to leave. Suddenly they had this problem of, well, I can't be sure whether someone who says they're Christian really is. What if they converted? What if they're pretending? Let me see what they're eating in secret. And so some of these kind of external ways of behaving became ways in which people were kind of trying to tell whether your soul was true or not.
Yeah, I keep going back to cannibalism because when I read your book, it just opened my eyes to some angles towards that behavior that I'd not even looked at. But really, if you think about that, if you think about basically saying these people consume other people, you're not able to bury them. They're not able to rise again. Then once that got rolling, then you weren't dealing with humans anymore. You were dealing with monsters, and really these explorers were enacting pest control rather than conquering and raping and pillaging.
Well, that was the exception that various monarchs gave to kind of people who were enslaving indigenous people. If they were cannibals, that was okay because you were doing it for their victims. So these people were, you might say, were framed as they were monstrous in behavior. They had broken the social contract of not kind of eating people, and yet that central ritual of Catholic and Anglican Christianity, that of say the Mass, is one of consuming the blood and flesh of God, you could say.
Sadie chimed in the chat. It's important to dehumanize others if you want to brutalize them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's some of the work that monsters framed as negative beings do for societies. That's why they make that kind of monster. They're not all monsters are negative. Some are neutral, and some are even optimistic and positive.
I will say Ryan also chimed in, I think, on the last question there. He says, is this climatist rather than racist?
That's an interesting one. It's a something, because the kind of that theory that bodies were malleable, that kind of humoral theory, kind of contained within it the possibility that you too could become something entirely different. So there's a kind of fuzzy space. Oh, what is that?
Sadie mentioned positive monsters. A golem. I have a little golem.
You have a golem.
Yeah, someone brought this back from Prague for me. They were teaching in Prague about its acts. Yeah, one of the many monsters that I have over here, including Ninja Turtles and Groot and Alf.
You have a great many. I mean, what faced with that kind of climate theory, European colonists needed new stories to not be freaked out about settling in places like the Caribbean, where they're often, getting sick and people were dying of unfamiliar diseases. And, one of the stories they told was that, yes, bodies change in different climates, but you keep an essence from where you came. And that means Europeans will remain different from indigenous Americans and from enslaved Africans. And they also told stories about how enslaved Africans were apparently more fit for working in in hot climates. And so that, that kind of climaticist thinking, almost, what should we call it, almost ethnoclimatological thinking, was kind of doing that work of crafting race as well, of crafting hierarchies in which something essentially in entire populations supposedly made them inferior.
All right, so Brandy will be upset with me if I don't sneak the announcements in. So I'm going to jump in really quick and do our announcements for all the peculiars. You remember you can follow us on all the social medias, all of them. I know our Facebook groups are very strong, and we're working hard to moderate those. Blue Sky. I know I saw Surekha's post on Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky. Brandy's on Blue Sky these days. Bill is on Blue Sky these days. So great place to come and chat with us. Remember all the different places we are, the Goodreads, the all the different podcast apps, obviously watching on YouTube. Join the Facebook groups. You get to vote on things like the name of the cocktail. That's an exclusive thing for our Facebook group members. The newsletter, Brandy's newsletter. I think most of you are probably subscribed, but for any of our podcast listeners out there, or for anybody who's watching this not live, make sure you're signing up for Brandy's newsletter, because not only do you get information about the show, but you also get fun little, things that Brandy writes. Obviously Brandy's not going to put something out without putting a creative twist on it. So definitely make sure you're signing up for the newsletter. Peculiar membership. This is a VIP show, and if you think it's pretty cool to be here exclusively for one of our Authors on Authors episodes, then you got to sign up as a VIP. And you'll get access to this. You also get cool swag and some extra content. So make sure it also helps keep the show going. Helps keep the show going. So make sure you are signing up for that on Patreon. And now the book cocktail in honor of Surekha's book. The winning name was Cosmology's Creature Clarifier. And for our podcast listeners, if you can't see this one, it is. It's got a skeleton arm sticking out of it, so quite a monstrous drink. The recipe does say optional 1 drop of hot sauce, but I'm going to question whether that should be optional. I feel like that should be mandatory if it's truly a monstrous drink. I'm a bit of a, as you saw from me and Brandy's husband Mark doing a Hot Ones segment a few episodes ago. I like hot sauce. All right. And then our last announcement, we also do the Peculiar Movie Club. We want to make sure that on the podcast feed, you have lots of fun content. So why not take a break from books and see if those themes carry over to the movie world? So obviously, Surekha, with your book, I mean, literally hundreds of movies we could have chosen from. Like, how do we narrow that down? So I went with a movie that I've never seen before. I thought it'd be fun to add a new film. I've seen clips. I've seen pieces and parts. I have a general idea of what I'm in for. But we're going to do 1986's The Fly. Jeff Goldblum. Why am I blanking on Gina Davis? I'm blanking on the director's name. Cronenberg, yes. So that is going to be our April movie. Whether we actually make it to air by April, we will see. Me and Darren struggling to find the time to do this, but we will review The Fly. So what do you think? Is that a pretty monstrous movie for you? We're getting a thumbs up from Surekha.
Yeah, I also only saw, bits. I remember it being kind of scary.
Yeah.
I would also check out the 1956 version with Vincent Price.
There you go.
Oh,
there you
wow,
go.
I'm sure
I'm going to have to
that's
compare the two.
It has a classic last scene. The fade out scene in there is one of the great scenes in horror.
Excellent. All right. So we got our homework assignment from me and from Bill now too. Some extra watching. So that is all our announcements. I know Bill's got a few more questions. I want to encourage the peculiars, even though Bill's hosting and not Brandy, we still want you to participate and ask questions. So go ahead and fill up the chat. Jennifer said, check out the pod if you haven't. Just listen to the Free Willy episode. Really fun. Looking forward to The Fly. Yeah, last month we did a book about whales, about killer whales. So what other movie was I going to choose besides Free Willy? And yeah, me and Darren had a really fun conversation on it. So I hope you enjoyed that. So Sharon did have a question, kind of piggybacking off our last conversation. She wanted to know, didn't the church need to make these people non-human in some way so that enslaving them isn't a sin?
Oh, they entirely had to create a new category, um, and with and there were kind of new categories that were created both for kind of indigenous Americans and for enslaved Africans. So indigenous Americans were supposedly kind of nature's children. So they weren't yet fully able to comprehend Christianity and the proper way of living. And in with enslaved Africans, and of course, slavery was not a new thing in the 16th century. There's been slavery, since ancient times, but it had, until we get to the Atlantic slave trade, slavery, in the Mediterranean world, in Eurasia, had tended to be something that you fell into as an individual, perhaps because you were captured in war. And it was something that you might, stop being. So it was an individual unfortunate circumstance. But what you find in the by the 17th century, when there is this traffic of European enslavers kidnapping Africans and taking them to the Caribbean, what you start to see is new laws being written down in legal codes in places like Barbados that are defining Christian servants as a different category from Black African enslaved people, defining them as having different rights, and defining them also as not Christian. And this is how you could kind of get around the kind of church's mission of converting, all of humanity. And those slave and servant codes in places like Barbados and Virginia would kind of list the ways in which there would be, different punishments and different kinds of rights for, poor white Christian servants and enslaved Africans. So what you see here is this breaking of this worker solidarity and this breaking apart of the kind of humanity under Christendom, if you will. And yet at the same time, another story being told was how enslavement was part of a path of bringing Africans to the church. Again, this story of being in a hierarchy of civilization.
I think I'm going to try to change up the topic here just a bit. And I was a college professor for a long time, and I've spent quite a bit of time trying to explain to students and readers and the public about how evolution works via natural selection. And I think you gave it a really interesting take in your book. Can you talk about the line in your book that reads, quote, "Monsters were the drivers of evolution," end quote?
Sure. Where to begin? So maybe the place to start is kind of Darwin and his, iconic kind of origin of species, and the story of how random mutations that individual animals might acquire might, if the climate became different or the amount of food stuff changed, might be something that meant a particular group, the ones that had a certain genetic difference would be more likely to survive, more likely to have children. What he's really describing there is evolution by monstrification. So if a species is changing because only the ones with certain genetic markers are surviving their environment, then what's really happening is that with over the generations, life on Earth has just become these compound monstrous beings. And now, Bill, I've forgotten the cool quotation you
Monsters
had
were
from the
the
book.
monsters were the drivers of evolution.
Yeah. So the winners in those cases were these the ones who had changed in ways that meant they could survive when the climate, if you will, became something else. And so that's, you could say that evolution is just a story of monsters begetting those who are monstrous to them. And as the climatic chips fall, and the environmental foodstuff scenarios change, those defects or aberrations or abnormal elements that might make X or Y individual monstrous, so not normal, they survived because of that. And
Yeah,
maybe there's a
I think there's a real lack of understanding about this whole concept that evolution doesn't really happen unless there is unless there's change, an environmental change, whether it's predators coming in or the food that most of the population are eating dies out, or the climate changes, and it's the variation that you find in a population that suddenly, if you've got a mutation that allows you to eat something else that happens to be there, let's say it's a hard nut and you've got a mutation that gives you a stronger jaw muscles, then you're going to survive and pass that on to the next generation. And that's what natural selection is. That's what that's what Darwin's idea really is in a nutshell. And it's just, it's surprising to me sometimes that people just don't get that. They're like, I'm looking at this dog, why isn't it evolving? And I guess back in history, it was people were looking at monkeys going, well, why aren't they evolving into humans? That's you're on the wrong track here. It didn't happen like that. But I liked the way that you approached it in the book, in a short segment that you wrote about.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. I'm honored that a zoologist thinks like my toe dip in evolution was okay.
I want to throw in some comments from the peculiars here. Lorelei said the mental gymnastics that people go through to justify things is impressive and extremely terrifying.
It is, and would that they would use those creative skills in a different way and just write novels.
Sadie says, and it's happening now, branding people as criminals and illegals.
Yeah, there's stories about how they don't fit in the body politic, so they're monstrous to the body politic, and monstrosity is a very particular kind of dehumanization, because it's not the same as saying, oh, they're so different, they're so the kind of monster is at the edge of the normal. So where's the boundary between the self and other beings? You can only say that two categories are separate if you disappear, anybody who straddles those categories. And, immigrants straddle that category between foreign countries and the domestic country.
And then you push them over the edge by saying things like they're eating dogs, they're eating your cats.
Yeah, so you push them over the edge, morally, spiritually, legally. Just call them illegal. Even that very language is destined to kind of make them seem less regular.
That led right into this question that I had, another question, and that is, given our monster making history and the fact that it still takes place on such a horrific scale, what are some key suggestions for how we can do a better job of eliminating it?
Well, so much of life exists on a continuum. And okay, we may not look at a chimpanzee and see a continuum, but we know that, while we know what a human is in geographical space, when, even zoologists aren't so sure of what human is in geological time. So we're on a continuum with other life in time. But when people create categories like men and women and decide that they are separate and somehow feel that their own identity, their own being depends on those categories being separate, that's when they start to make, bad decisions that harm people. And so maybe I could kind of two sets of suggestions. One is, it's really important that people kind of recognize that when monstrification happens, it's happening to, real people just like them. Also, often people telling monstrifying stories have another agenda that even the people who might think, oh my goodness, people are eating my pets, that's a cover for something else. So we need to be looking for the cover for the real agenda. And finally, monstrification, that appetite doesn't go away when people feed it. It just gets hungrier and hungrier and eats more and more people. And we've gone from, Haitians supposedly eating people's pets to, kind of trans people are danger and they basically don't exist, supposedly, to now we need to register for autistic people. It's kind of never ending. And
if you've got tattoos, you're in a gang.
Got tattoos, you're in a gang. But if more people were more comfortable with the continuum of human experience, then they wouldn't really care that there was a continuum from male to female, and then they wouldn't be so susceptible to people saying, vote for me because I don't like trans people. And you'll be like, well, I'm sorry, there's, where are you going to draw the line? How short does a woman's hair need to be before someone, decides that they can't possibly actually really be a woman, for example? I'm being ridiculous, but that really is where the conversation has got to in Britain. So I guess remembering that, I feel as if there's a lot of children's television that offers an alternative way of thinking about variety and difference and straddling categories. And for that, The Muppet Show has got to be, the best. You've got all of these humanoid, but also vaguely animal-like characters. And, if you recognize everyone as wondrous and unique and thus monstrous in that sense of uniqueness, then no one's a monster.
That's a really interesting comment. As somebody who started working on bats in the early 1990s, the thought back then was, oh, they're all rabid, they're blood-sucking creatures, they're going to fly into your hair. And over the course of the next 10, 15 years, I just saw this transition, most of it coming through kids shows and through PBS shows as well, and science shows. But it was the kids who were coming up with the answers during talks that I would give, because they knew a whole lot more about these creatures and that they were not monsters. And this was monstrification in the mammals, non-human mammals. But it sounds very much like what you're saying now, is that if you look to the Muppets and if you look to children being educated and having the ability to see things very differently than we see, then you get past these prejudices. And it's really something I've been trying to do with my books. It's just trying to take something that nobody understands or it sounds really icky, like cannibalism or blood feeding creatures, and just cut the jargon out and present it in a way that you can get the science messages across, but you're not hitting people over the head with stuff that they're going to thumb through quickly.
I was going to say, my house, Sesame Street, is on heavy rotation right now, and Monsters literally host the show. So yeah, it is monsters and people living together in maybe the most harmonious street in all of fiction.
Indeed.
All right. So speaking of monsters, you didn't think we were going to let you go a whole episode without hearing a little bit from our peculiar monster. We have a peculiar monster, and we have a special video. She was nice enough to record a video for us. So This is from Our Peculiar Monster.
No, no. Bad monster. Bad monstering. Time for monster school. Now, there are rules to being a good monster. Rule number 1. It's not just about being scary. Are you even paying attention? You see, feathers, spikes, and claws aren't always the best ways of being a monster. Monsters are what people make other people out to be. Basically, a vehicle for their prejudices. Are you paying attention? Pay attention. Yes, we all know you can growl and carry on. What have we talked about? Humans make monsters so they can other humans as monsters. Yes, you can still creep around in the darkness. Yes, you can still drink blood at midnight. Yes, all that is still about being a monster, but really good monsters follow the rules. Are you following the rules? Kids these days. You're not going to get anywhere with an attitude like that. On to lesson 2. I don't know why I bother. Oh yes, because we love monsters.
Cool.
Yay.
Not only a little moment with Brandy and Mark, but also, of course, the cats. You know, we can't do an episode without our
Darwin and Wallace.
Yeah.
Darwin even got a bit of airtime today by accident.
All right. Bill, do you have more? Do we want to, peculiars definitely want to keep getting your questions in. Let's see here. There were a few comments earlier. Anthro Girl said, we have to otherfy the bad people to prove that we don't have anything in common, to show we couldn't be the bad ones.
Yeah. It's sort of like plausible deniability for actually being a horrible human being. People get to be the good people if the people who are having, horrible time because I was looking at the chat, because, they've had to undergo screening before they can compete as women, and you come up with random hormone numbers, and suddenly women who've been women their whole lives are being told they don't match. If you decide that trans people or non-binary people or people with different amounts of hormones in their blood are aberrations, you can just pretend your hands are clean and you're not actually being horrible. That's really not strong enough word. But yes.
Well, we'll keep trying. We'll find the right word. We got 20 minutes more to go in this episode.
They're monstrifying acts, aren't they? Because they're implicitly saying there are groups of people who are too threatening to have the same rights as everyone else.
Mm-hmm. I just really quick, a few comments on the video. Sadie said, "Shiny, happy monster having fun." Sadie said, "What a fun costume." Yeah, we all assume that's just like Brandy's regular pajamas, right? Like that's just she looked to be really enjoying those leather pants. Let me guess, Brandy just had that lying around. Ryan said, "Don't eat the cat." Sadie said, "Boop." So they had fun with the video. We do have a question from Laura Siana. Since much of our present monstrification exemplifies the maxim that every accusation is an admission, might there be a fear and recognition among the accusers of their own monsterness?
Oh, I like that. Every accusation does seem to be an admission, but certain, perpetrators are just so horrible. It's hard to imagine how much belief, self awareness they have. But I rather like the way the press came up with this spooky tinfoil mirror on the cover of the book that maybe helps people to kind of wonder. Oh, humans. Oh, monsters. Oh, wait, what? I'm in here. Which one am I? So, oh yes. I, I'm going to try to kind of psychoanalyze the minds of people out there in the
Current day monster
world. I guess if I was thinking about the kind of transphobia again, and it's there's got to be an element of fear of who the self is, to worry that there's a continuum from woman to man. I mean, it was like, I don't care. There's a continuum. It doesn't, change the fact that I am a woman. But
do you think because we keep ourselves so siloed, maybe as a society, that that's once you start to hear the stories, like the propaganda machines that run, like everything falls apart once you actually start to hear human stories and people's actual stories?
Yeah. And certainly, this is just like my kind of anecdotal kind of memory of things I've read here and there. It's I'm certainly in the kind of anti kind of immigrant discourse. It's the places that don't have any that are really frightened of them, and everyone else gets on with life because they have neighbors who are people who they know, they spend time with, and maybe kind of that is one of the challenges that the digital world has kind of added on top of the with the kind of language and cultural variations, socioeconomic stratification. Now we also have digital silos from which to monstrify people who don't think the same as we do.
I've got a question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
If you were to look back at your book, at all of the stories, the vignettes, all of the interesting things that you talked about, what are some that we haven't really touched on yet that you think really bring out the essence of this book?
Oh gosh, I guess we haven't talked so much about the kind of like the happy monsters, the machines. There are probably a fair few Star Trek Next Generation fans among
Aliens.
Julius. We could think a bit about the monsters that aren't just the social monsters. So in the book, I look at how monsters define the human at kind of three kinds of boundary. And one is a boundary between kind of like human and other kinds of beings. So where does the human end and various animals begin? Where do gods begin? Where's the boundary between human and machine, human and extraterrestrial? And then we talked about like the social monsters, how monsters are stories people tell to keep social groups separate. And then there are the monsters of the parameters of the normal. How do you decide what a normal human body is like in terms of shape or ability? So words like freak, giant, prodigy, superhero, perhaps. They're all words that show us thinking about individuals who expand or break the parameters of the kind of normal individual. So I suppose the kind of sci-fi machine cyborg superhero zone is something we haven't talked about. And I see Sadie is going TNG excitedly. So maybe that's a place to go. And somewhere kind of more upbeat is one of my favorite monsters, if you will, and that's Lieutenant Commander Data in The Next Generation. And anyone who hasn't watched it, do please go back and maybe start on TNG season 3 or 4 if you start on season 1 and it feels too weird. But
why does it feel too weird? I watched
well,
that show.
it does feel, I'm saying it might feel too weird and too old and strange and dated. I mean, for me watching it now, it looks very yellow. And the early series, the acting style is a bit different, and they seem more comfortable once we get to about season 3 or 4, and the plots become I don't know, they feel more believable. There you are.
I feel like the world probably gets bigger at that point by season 3, right? The stories kind of take on bigger arcs and things like that.
Everyone's familiar with the characters by then.
Yeah.
We did do 3 episodes on the Peculiar Movie Club earlier in the year. So we did an episode where we jumped into the TV world, and we did 3 episodes of TNG. So
oh gosh, I am so behind on the podcast. I know that the problem is blinking Apple Podcasts. You cannot arrange those squares in a sensible way. You need a spreadsheet. Because they're not alphabetical, they don't, yeah. So there's like, once you have more than like 6, and I must have 60, it's kind of hard to keep up with. But anyway, there's Lieutenant Commander Data is this android who is clearly a machine. So he's a slightly yellow color. He's got yellow eyes. He has a slightly stilted way of speaking. And he's terrific at all kinds of computational things, and he's incredibly strong. But all he wants is to be more like humans. So he spends his time, spare time, trying to, play musical instruments and dance and paint and can figure out, how humans act. And, the tragic or the poignant thing is he's the most selfless, amazing person. And, he kind of, you watch Data and you feel like a horrible person because he is so selfless and generous.
As opposed to his brother.
As opposed to his brother. And, that's the interesting thing. So it turns out that Data has a twin brother, Lore, who is more convincing as a human. He speaks naturally. He's still yellow, but in every other way, he's just like a human being. There's no awkward movement. But he's also evil, which makes him even more like us. But he's uncanny. He's close enough to being like us to make us wonder if, we could even tell he was an android if his outer, whatever it's called, skin were just a different shade. We would not actually be able to tell, and that's kind of spooky.
Sadie said, but Data is a cat lover.
Data is a cat lover. That's good, isn't it?
And Laura Ciano said, yes, we weren't too thrilled by TNG seasons 1 and 2 when they were new either.
Yeah, but they get better. And oh my God, by the time we get to the Borg, wow. Oh, yeah. And the Borg are sort of like an upside down apocalyptic version of a good way for society to be. So, the Borg don't worry about other beings. They're like, great, we will just add your distinctiveness to our own. And they swallow these entire planets. Now, so what's bad about them is that they, of course, don't ask permission. But they don't fear people who have skills they do not have. And that is a different way to look at human variety and ingenuity and ways of thinking. And, maybe if intelligent, complex life ever makes it to Earth, and, who knows whose good ideas or cosmologies or ways of communicating might be the ones that mean we communicate in ways that we don't end up annihilated.
All right. I want to make sure we get this question in. We are running a little low on time, but we have a new peculiar, fresh boy swag almighty. Says, "Hello, I'm new to this peculiar book club, but I'm interested in hearing about how cannibalist monsters or the depictions of these monsters might be different from other monsters." And then continued on and said, kind of like how it's presented in the Brazilian tupi and
Oh, yes.
re-explored in Brazilian modernism.
Oh, yes. Let me try and keep all those pieces together. So I guess cannibalism is a behavioral monstrosity. It's not that these are, whether it's, ancient ideas about anthropophages, human eaters, or 16th, 17th century ideas about, cannibals who were, in the Caribbean. They might kind of look a regular shape, but it was the behavior that had crossed a line and broken the social contract. So in that sense, they're different from the range of monster stories I look at in my book, which is all the kind of quote unquote monsters that are somehow tied to beings of different shapes, or beings where people are desperate to identify them as different from something visible, like skin color. And I mean, the Brazilian Tupi peoples were one of the groups of peoples who practiced ritual cannibalism. So particular ritual context in which there was eating of human flesh, and there's a in the early 20th century, there's a Brazilian modernist aesthetic movement, the anthropofagista movement, which is one that kind of decided to own this, this practice through which they were monstrified by Europeans, and to say, well, there's a metaphorical way of consuming and metabolizing and creating new, art forms and new ways of thinking, and that is one of the long-standing, distinctively Brazilian ways of thinking. So you could say that the Brazilian kind of modernist movement was a sort of a monstro-futurist movement. That maybe, I mean, I don't think they actually said, yes, let's eat cannibal flesh, eat human flesh, but more celebrating ways of being creative and experimental and different, and learning and growing rather than ossifying cultures. And that's the other thing that often white supremacists are doing, for example, and other kind of ethno-nationalist groups are telling these stories of cultures as if they've been stuck set in stone for millennia, which they never have been. And by deciding to be cardboard cutouts or wanting to be cardboard cutouts, they're also saying they don't ever want to grow or experience all of the ways of being alive, frankly.
All right. So we reached the point in the show where it is time to quiz the author. Bill, I looked back on what we did last time you were on the show, and I think you got finished the James Brown lyrics quiz, because I think you had mentioned you'd mentioned a quote by James Brown in the book or something like that, right? About in Chew.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we're doing something a little different. We're going back on a quiz style that we've done in the past. It's kind of Family Feud style. We're going to do These are movie monsters ranked, and you're gonna have to try to figure out the top 6 movie monsters of all time. This was according to there were a lot of lists, so don't blame me on the list. I went with theringer.com, had an article, had a list. So that's who we're pulling this from. So you'll probably disagree with some of these entries. You might have some of your favorites that are not in the top 6, but the Peculiars are here to help you out. Top 6 answers on the board. Surekha, Bill's here to help you out too. And I believe we're going to give away a book, a signed book for whoever gets the most right. I might not be able to figure it out live, but you'll be sure that I will go back and double check and see who gets the most right answers. So, top 6 answers on the board. Who do you think they ranked as the top 6 movie monsters of all time?
Who did they rank? Oh, I've got to come up with the monster names. Oh, you know, of course, this is not a multiple choice. Okay. King Kong.
All right.
Godzilla.
Show me King Kong. Yes, King Kong was number 5.
Can I go?
Sure. Well, sure. Go for it.
Frankenstein.
Show me Frankenstein. There we go. I heard you had another answer there, Surekha. You had 2.
Godzilla.
Show me Godzilla. Number one movie monster. Bill has the perfect shirt. For our podcast listeners, Bill's got his Godzilla shirt on today in honor of monsters. All right. We need number 2, number 3, and number 6. I'll give you a hint. I think all 3 of these are from the 80s.
Got it.
Or maybe just slightly early 90s.
Now, what kind of monsters would they be thinking?
Yeah, there were a lot of universal monsters possible. Jennifer threw out Dracula.
I'm going to go with the Peculiar's help here, and I think surely Dracula has got to count.
Dracula, show me Dracula.
I got one.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, Bill.
Predator.
Show me Predator. But you're on the right track. You're on the right track there.
Terminator.
Show me a Terminator. Yes, specifically the T-1000. They had as the number 6 movie monster.
I blew it. I got one.
Yep, go for it.
Alien.
Show me a Xenomorph. Number
a
2.
Xenomorph.
Yeah.
Yay.
Number 3 might be a little. This one might be a little challenging to get, but it really is a fantastic. I think it's either late 70s or early 80s.
I got it. Okay.
Movie monster. Incredible effects work. Let's see if any of the Peculiars know in the chat. Let's see here. Sadie asked Gremlins. No, unfortunately, Gremlins weren't. I think Gremlins might be on the list, but higher up. It was from a list that was their top 30.
Movie monsters. Well, I want to say the Jaws shark. I think it'd be one of my favorites.
Bruce, show me Bruce the shark from Jaws.
What about E.T.?
Show me E.T., a friendly monster. No. I know there's hundreds of movie monsters to choose from. I will narrow this down more. You might want to check out what Lorelei Peterson said in the chat.
Oh, did we not say Alien? Oh,
No.
isn't that the Xenomorph? Oh, what else is Laura? The Thing. Oh.
Show me The Thing. Yes, The Thing would be our final one, our 3rd on the list. And what picture are you going to use for The Thing? I feel like this is like the picture people think of, the disembodied head on the long neck for our podcast listeners. It's hard to figure out what image to use for The Thing.
Peculiar should check out the 51 version, the original version of The Thing, which is one of the most impressive movies you will ever see. Some of the first overlapping dialogue, just brilliant.
Excellent. I keep bringing up 80s movies, and Bill keeps taking us back to the 50s. I love it. All right.
Yes.
It is. Sadie, I completely agree. It is a bit of a strange ranking, but I think that's the fun of movie monsters. Like every list I looked at had something different. One had Nosferatu as their number 1 movie monster. It felt like this list had a nice mix of creatures, and then Frankenstein representing the universal monsters, and something a little more modern with the T-1000. So this list also kind of fit your book because it also had people, just monstrous
Yeah.
people. They had Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter, who really is like one of the most monstrous characters in the whole thing. Yeah, so it's a fun. They had Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men, who really is a monster, a movie monster. So yeah.
Well, as Susan Silver said in the comments, I'm not sure we're going to get alien monsters actually bothering to come to visit us. So we're going to be stuck with whatever monsters we are, and that we storyfy out of one another and whatever life forms we decide we don't care for.
I'm watching the chat now just fill up with everybody's favorite monster.
Yeah.
So I love you, chat. You're wonderful. The Substance. Yeah, I saw The Substance too. Crazy movie. Awesome movie. Bill, since you are our guest host, do you have a final question? We'll give you the honor of the final question for Surekha.
Well, Surekha, we're both educators, and I'd really like to have $1 for every time an aspiring author has come up to me and asked for some suggestions about how to become a published author. Do you have any comments or suggestions in that regard?
What's a quick answer? If you're flexible about where you're published and what you publish, you will, that's a good way to start. Think about what it is you want to achieve, and what you can control, which you can't control whether you get a deal of a certain sort, but you can make the words on the page and then figure out how to share them. So I'd say work on the craft and read books that excite and inspire you.
Brilliant.
All right. Well, Peculiars, thank you for joining us, the Peculiar Book Club. Surekha, thank you for this wonderful book and for sharing these stories, these fascinating tales with us, and a subject I don't think we've covered really on the show yet. So a really unique conversation to add to the Peculiar Book Club. And Bill, wonderful job hosting. Thank you so much for
welcome.
Leading us through this and your wonderful question.
Great being here. Thank you for all your help.
Absolutely. That's what I'm here for. No matter who's hosting, I'm here to help.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you, Peculiars, and everyone who came and joined in.
Yes, thank you, Peculiars. Your chat was wonderful. Your questions were wonderful. I'm so glad to hear new Peculiars are joining us. I hope you keep joining us live for new episodes because your questions really make the show a lot of fun. So, as Brandy would say, thanks for joining us at a place where, if you're weird, you're family.
You got the blue bottle blues when you wake up in the night. Don't make a big mistake, 'cause you can never make it right. When you reach out for the vial, feel the ridges in the glass. It's a matter of survival, baby, better watch your back. There is no antidote. There is no antidote. There is no antidote.